Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Nika Fanfics. Back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What If Winged Deku Had Wildcat Quirk? Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. The city was loud at night. Despite what others might say, nighttime was anything but silent. Whether it was the mechanical revving of engines, honking horns, and screeching railway tracks from evening commuters, or the clanking, clattering, and shattering sounds of glass breaking from bar fights and drunks. The city was always alive and buzzing at night. However, cities could only ever be as alive as the beings that occupy them. Emerald eyes opened lazily as a yawn escaped. The last of the sunlight set hours ago, but the emerald-eyed being had remained still up until now, preferring to waste time over energy. Wind and rain scattered most scents, as the cold air chilled most living beings to their bones. Some creatures were still out and about. Their need for food far surpasses their need for warmth or shelter. A mouse squeaks, whiskers twitching as it scurries along cold concrete, sniffing the air for any trace of food that might still remain. A discarded bag of chips catches the mouse's attention. Peeking inside, the mouse found food and a temporary shelter from the rain. The little mouse ducked inside the bag and began to eat. Unfortunately for the mouse who had found its next meal, so had an emerald-eyed shadow. Just as the shadow was about to pounce, one of the metal doors swung open, and someone stumbled into the alleyway, scaring the mouse into grabbing the bag of chips and running off into the night. The shadow hissed in retaliation to the intruder ruining their meal, but the intruder only chuckled as the door opened again and more people stepped out into the cold, wet alleyway. "Looky, air!" The first one called out to the others, pointing a bottle of strong-smelling alcohol at the shadow. "The F is that?" The second one sneered in disgust, but the shadow ignored them, closing their eyes once again as they waited for the next prey to wander into the alley. "Ah, don't be like that, babe. It's just a little baby." A different human whined, words slurring together in a barely understandable sentence. "You're joking, right? That thing looks like a freak of nature." The last one scoffed, glancing at his practically empty bottle with a grin. "Watch this," he called out, holding the bottle by its neck, so the shadow opened their eyes, watching the human just as they had requested, flicking their tail in annoyance. The man threw the bottle at the shadow, who simply rolled out of the way before they could be hit and looked back up at the humans, completely unamused. "EY. You ain't posed to move." The first one yelled, chuckling his own bottle at the shadow as well, who once again moved out of the way, only to have the shards of the broken glass come to life and attack. The shadow dodged to the best of their ability as the glass continued to attack, hissing at the man once again. Their tail whipped back and forth, snapping their fangs at them in warning, only to be cut by a shard of glass. Their fangs digging into the closest thing. One of them yells, cursing the shadow out for simply wanting to be left alone. Glass shards clatter to the ground as a new shadow dropped into the alleyway from the rooftop. "Scram!" The new shadow with glowing red eyes and floating hair commanded, and much to the little emerald shadow's surprise, the humans listened. "I can't just have one peaceful night, can I?" The new shadow sighed. Glowing red eyes turned black. Hair falls onto their shoulders, leaving a normal human standing in the rain. The little shadow watched the human for a few seconds as they rubbed their eyes and moved the hair out of their face before losing interest and walking away. A sharp yelp leaves the little shadow, who had stepped on a piece of glass while trying to leave, drawing the new human's attention right to them. The shadow backed away, on 3 paws, eyes narrowed at the new human who was staring at them with wide eyes, apparently not having noticed the little shadow before. The human rubbed their eyes once more, blinking at the little shadow a few times. "Huh? Hello there." The human greeted, crouching down and extending a hand towards the shadow. The shadow looked over at the mouth of the alleyway, then back towards the human, tail swaying low as they growled, teeth bared at the human. "Hey now, none of that, little one." The human cooed. "I'm not gonna hurt you." Emerald eyes glanced at the exit once more, then down at their paw where glass shards were embedded, then back at the human with a huff. "Were those mean people bothering you?" the human asked, and the shadow huffed, opting to not move from their spot. Instead, the little emerald shadow decided to sit down, after carefully checking that no glass was there. The human blinked, copying the shadow. They moved from crouching to sitting on the ground with their legs crossed. "Want something to eat?" the human asked, reaching into their belt and taking out a plastic bag. The human opened the bag, tilting it in the shadow's direction, both to keep the rain from falling into it and to offer it to them. "One of us has to move closer for you to reach this, little one," the shadow hissed. They stared at each other for a moment, neither of them blinking even as the little shadow growled at the human. The human only shook the bag of food, waiting patiently, stretching their arm out a little farther, but a little further was all the shadow needed. Standing up, the shadow quickly punched forward, snapping at the package in the human's hand, only for it to be pulled away, fangs biting down on cold air as the human leaned back in shock, food pack pulled to their chest. Ah. You can't have it if you can't play nice. The human chides, receiving a hiss of annoyance. Emerald eyes narrowed at the human once again, crouching down on their stomach, ignoring how the shards of glass were pressed deeper into their skin. The human offered the bag of food again, this time, keeping it in the hand resting on their lap. Hesitantly, the little shadow crawled a few steps closer to the human. That's it. The human cooed. The shadow huffed but continued to move towards the human. There we go. That wasn't so hard, was it? The human asked, taking out a piece of food from the bag and offering it over to the little shadow, who chomped down on it and backed away a few steps before settling down, munching on what was apparently dried-out meat. You want another one? The human offered, earning a hum in response. The human took out another piece of meat and held it out. Emerald eyes blinked at the human with another huff, moving closer to the human once again to take the food from them. This time, the little shadow stayed next to the human as they munched on the dried meat. Well, aren't you a strange little thing? The human mussed, handing over another piece of food. Did you hurt your paw? They asked after a moment of silence, a frown now pulling at the human's face. The little shadow looked at the human, looked at the food, then looked back at the human, crawling closer. Slowly, they leaned forward, biting down on the bag and successfully snatching it from the human this time. They placed it on the ground in front of themselves, easily pulling out another piece of food to munch on. The human watched curiously, pulling the bag of snacks away from the little creature slowly, only for them to follow the bag, stopping every once in a while to eat the piece they had grabbed. After a few minutes of carefully moving the bag away from the little creature, the human had them in their lap. A hand was gently resting on top of soaking wet fur and feathers. The human's other hand was digging something out of their belt once again. A bright light shined down on them, causing the little shadows to freeze, head pulling away from the almost empty bag of food to look at the human. A low growl building in the back of their throat. Shush, you. I'm just trying to see how bad you're hurt, then I'll turn the light back off. The human explained, so the shadow stopped growling and went back to eating their snack. The next thing the little shadow knows, the light is turned off, the snack bag is empty, and the human is standing up with the little shadow still in their arms. The little shadow had tried to escape, growling and hissing as they thrashed about in an attempt to break free, but the human had the little shadow's wings and tail pinned to their body, rendering them useless to aid their escape. Hey, enough of that. Shush. You're all right, little one. It's okay. I'm just trying to take you somewhere to treat these injuries. The human explained, trying to calm them down, which only earned another hiss and snap of their jaw in warning. I'll give you more beef jerky if you behave. The human offered. You want more of that, don't you? This little bag is all empty, but I have more at home. The little shadow huffed but stopped fighting the human. Okay? You're gonna behave now? The human asked, receiving a hum. The human let out a sigh of relief, moving their scarf to wrap around the little creature, adding an extra layer of security to make sure they didn't fall or try to run off again. Let's get out of this rain, yeah? Then I'll take care of those injuries and you can have as much jerky as you want. The shadow purred contently, nuzzling against the warmth. What a weird little creature. The human chuckled, taking off into the night. The promise of more food keeping the little creature calm and quiet as the city noise buzzed around them. Hizashi woke up with a start, adrenaline shooting through their body from a nightmare they couldn't quite remember. It wasn't unusual, not for them, and certainly not for the field they work in. Perhaps Shouta was right about needing to slow down and take a break, or perhaps Hizashi just needed some quality cuddles before going back to bed for however long they had until they needed to get up for work. Turning over in bed, away from the ceiling they had been staring at in the dark, looking around, Hizashi was met with the sight of empty sheets beside them. A sigh left their lips as they closed their eyes. Blindly reaching over on the nightstand, Hizashi grabbed their phone, turning it on to check the time. They squeezed their eyes tight as the bright phone screen attempts to blind them, even with their eyes closed. Blinking rapidly to get used to the light, rubbing tiredly at their eyes, allowing them to refocus in the light, so Hizashi could actually see the screen. 4:57 a.m. Hizashi stared at the time with furrowed eyebrows and a frown pulling at their lips. Shouta should have gotten home almost 2 hours ago. Sure, patrols could sometimes run long, or something last minute could have popped up, but Shouta would usually send a text message letting them know what was going on. Grabbing their hearing aids off their charger, Hizashi put them on before climbing out of bed. Putting on a pair of slippers, the blonde wandered out of the bedroom and down the hall. A worried frown still resting in place as they went to investigate, silently hoping that Shouta had just passed out on the couch after patrol instead of the other, more worrisome possibilities. It wouldn't be the first time their husband just didn't have the energy to shower, change clothes, and come to bed. It was a lot to do after a graveyard shift, so the list wasn't always completed. Sometimes none of it got done and Shouta would sleep on the couch, opting to deal with it in the morning. Hizashi paused at the guest bathroom, peering inside curiously. The light had been left on, cabinets and drawers left in different states of closed and open, but there was no one inside. A few towels and the first aid kit were missing, which only caused them more anxiety as they continued down the rest of the hallway. Having barely made it to the end of the hallway when they heard a muffled curse and a hiss of pain, Hizashi's heart rate spiked, and they moved a bit quicker into the living room. "Sho?" they called out nervously, chest tight with anxiety, only to freeze at the sight in front of them. Shouta looked up from where he was sitting on the floor, seemingly uninjured, surrounded by used and bloodied medical supplies. An animal of some kind was cradled in his lap, wrapped in a towel, and munching on what appeared to be beef jerky, if the empty packages were anything to go off. Taking a deep breath, allowing some of their nerves to settle, they leaned against the archway. "I'm assuming you aren't hurt?" Hizashi asked, not putting it above their husband to treat a stray animal he found on the streets over his own injuries. "I'm not." Shouta agreed, looking back down at the small creature in his lap. He finished up what appeared to be the last of the little one's injuries and handed them another piece of jerky. "All done." The man cooed, but the creature ignored him in favor of munching on their snack. Hizashi moved closer to get a better look at the animal, only to receive a hiss when the creature noticed them. "Hey! None of that or no jerky, remember?" And much to their surprise, the little animal hummed in response to the scolding Shouta had given them. Instead of snapping at them again, the creature turned to look at Hizashi with bright green, narrowed eyes. "Zashi, come here." Shouta beckoned, but the blonde remained in place, looking between the creature and their husband. "I don't think your little friend wants me to come any closer." Hizashi laughed nervously. "Just turn on the light and come here." Slowly. Their husband instructs with a roll of his eyes. They held eye contact, staring at each other for a bit before Hizashi eventually gave in. Flicking on the main light and turning off the little lamp that Shouta had been using before, Hizashi waited, letting the little animal get used to the change in the environment first. Eventually, Hizashi began to move closer, slowly, just as Shouta had instructed. The creature watched them but didn't snap or hiss again. Shouta moved the little one around to remove the now bloody towel from under them, earning a huff from the creature. "Give them some of the jerky." Their husband instructed, so Hizashi did. Crouching down to the floor, they picked up one of the packs and grabbed a few pieces of dried meat from it. Holding one of the pieces out for the little one to take. A clawed paw swiped at it and snatched the food away from them. Hizashi jumps back in surprise while Shouta chuckled at them. If the creature wasn't a sight to behold, then they didn't know what was. They definitely had to have some kind of mutation quirk. There was no other explanation, well, no other pleasant explanation. There was always the chance that someone somewhere was still doing animal experiments. Either way, they were definitely something one has to see to believe. A four-legged animal that could be mistaken for a lion cub if not for the dark feathered wings. Their fur and feathers were all different shades of green, with some black and white areas scattered in between. Hizashi grabbed another piece of jerky and handed it to the little creature. "Where the hell did you find them?" Hizashi asked, staring at the little creature who was happily munching on their food. "In an alleyway near the end of patrol while scaring off some drunks. I'm fairly sure they had been attacking the poor thing." Shouta explained with a frown. Hizashi hummed, handing another piece of jerky to the creature, then surveyed the medical supplies that had been taken out and used. "Are all those glass shards from the poor baby?" Hizashi asked when they spotted the metal bowl of glass shards, tweezers, and bloody gauze pads. Not sure if I got all of it. We'll need to stop by Chiyo's office in the morning." Hizashi blinked. Once. Twice. Then laughs, shaking their head in amusement. "You want to keep don't you?" Shouta hums in agreement, petting the top of the creature's head, who blinks up at him with their wide green eyes. "The fact that people think I'm the softie in this relationship is ridiculous." Hizashi huffed, earning a chuckle from their husband. "Is that a yes to keeping this little one?" Shouta asked as the creature wiggled out of his lap and limped over to the blonde on three paws. "I don't know, Sho. We don't even know what they are, let alone how to take care of them." Hizashi answered as the little creature stood up on their hind legs, batting at the empty bag of jerky with their good paw. "Ah. I'm sorry baby. There's no more." The blonde cooed, receiving a drawn-out clicking sound in response. "I know, it's very sad." Hizashi laughed. The little creature huffed and sat back down. That's not a no. Shouta pointed out. Hizashi gave him a tired look. We'll see what Chio and Nizu have to say, and then maybe we can keep them. Hizashi decides, which earns another chuckle from their husband. Now Shu. Go shower and change. Your uniform's soaking wet and I don't want you catching a cold. Hizashi scolded. I'll take care of this mess and get the little one situated. Shouta got up from the floor, patting the creature on the head, and placing a kiss on Hizashi's forehead. Thanks, love. Now go. Hizashi hummed in response, watching their husband disappear down the hallway and into their bedroom. And he's supposed to be the strict, no-nonsense, rule follower. The blonde pointed out in amusement, receiving a confused hum from the little creature. I don't know, baby. People come to the weirdest conclusions. Hizashi cooed, patting the little one on the head as they began to clean up. Shouta was the first one awake, despite running on only an hour and a half of sleep. If that could be considered sleep. It was really more of a nap than anything else. He got out of bed slowly, body aching from the previous night's patrol and lack of sleep. Fixing the sheets on his side of the bed, Shouta moved to the bathroom and began getting ready for the day, changing into a clean uniform, brushing his teeth, and fixing his hair. The same morning routine as any other day. Once he was done, Shouta left the bathroom, quietly moving through the bedroom and out into the hallway. Walking out into the living room, Shouta was met with the insistent meows of Cotton, who was once again demanding her breakfast before anyone else was allowed to eat. All right? Shush. I'll get you your food. Shouta huffed, following Cotton and her insistent meows into the kitchen. Shouta grabbed a can of tuna from the cabinet that had been designated as Cotton's years ago. The content of the can was emptied into one of her dishes. Cotton continued to make a fuse until the dish was placed on her food mat. Shouta was quickly pushed out of the way by the white fluff ball, who was now happily eating her breakfast. With Cotton taken care of, he moved on to making breakfast. Flicking on the kitchen light, Shouta was met with bright green eyes. The little creature curled up on the corner of the kitchen island, tail hanging over the edge, swaying slowly as they stared at him. You're not supposed to be up there, little one. Shouta chides, but the creature either didn't understand or didn't care. However, after seeing the flick of the little creature's tail and hearing the huff that they gave, Shouta was inclined to believe that they just didn't care. Fine, but when Zashi comes out here upset with you, it'll be no one's fault but your own. He informed them, receiving a trill in response that caused Shouta to pause. You were responding last night too. Shouta must. So, there's a possibility you have an intelligence quirk of some kind dash. Unless you're only talking because you hear us talking. The little creature hummed. Standing up on the countertop to stretch before sitting down. Their head tilted to the side as they continued to stare at him. Right. Let's get you some food. What can you eat besides jerky? Shouta asked no one in particular, fully aware that the little creature wouldn't answer. Opening the fridge, Shouta began taking out ingredients to make breakfast, as well as foods that could potentially be okay to feed the little creature. You wouldn't happen to know what you can and can't eat, would you? He received a whistle in response as the little creature stood up, walked over to the collection of food on the counter, and began nudging at the container of tofu that had been set out. Huh? That answers 2 questions. Shouta mused, putting away the extra foods and taking out another package of tofu. You gotta move, little one. Zashi and I aren't fans of fur in our food. Shouta explained, and the little creature gave a nod of their head before moving back to the corner of the counter where they wouldn't contaminate the food and would be out of the way. Thanks. Shout chuckled, offering them a pat on the head before moving over to the sink to wash his hand. Taking out a cutting board and knife, he began preparing breakfast. At some point, the little creature settled down and ended up taking a nap. Tail draped over their mostly flat nose, blocking out the sunlight from their eyes. The kitchen was relatively peaceful. Water boiled. Knives clicked against chopping boards. Food was cut into smaller, easier to consume pieces. Another stove top was lit by the flicker of a stove flame as a new pan was set on top of it. The prepared foods were thrown inside to begin cooking. Hizashi later wandered into the kitchen just as Shouta began serving. 2 bowls of miso soup were placed on the table with accompanying servings of rice for both of them. What's the little baby doing up on the counter? Hizashi questioned, receiving a chuckle from their husband. Morning, Zashi, Shouta greeted, placing a bowl of plain fried tofu cubes in front of the little creature. Good morning, babe, but that doesn't answer my question, and can they even have that? Hizashi asked as they pointed to the bowl that had been placed in front of the creature. I asked and that's what they wanted. Shouta shrugged, leaning back on the countertop next to where the little one was munching on their tofu. You asked. The blonde repeated as if testing to make sure they had heard him right. I asked them, Shouta confirmed with a nod of his head. Intelligence quirk? Most likely. Shouta shrugged. We'll have to wait and see what Chiyo and Nizu have to say about them to find out if it's true or not. Hizashi nodded along before moving on to the next topic. Did you manage to get any sleep? The blonde questioned, wrapping their arms around his waist and burying their face in the crook of his neck. Got a bit of a nap. Shouta hummed in response, placing a kiss on their forehead. Sorry about waking you up so early. Hizashi shook their head, causing them to nuzzle into his skin. It's fine, kitten. I was already up when I went looking for you. Hizashi explained, pressing a gentle kiss to Shouta's neck, where his pulse was beating the strongest. Nightmare? Shouta prompted, receiving an echoed response. Nightmare. Hizashi agreed. Now or later? Shouta questioned, and waited for a few moments. His partner was silent, thinking over their answer. Later. We have work and still need to see Chiyo and Nizu about the little baby you brought home. Hizashi decided. Alright. We'll talk about it later. For now, we should eat before the food gets cold. Shouta informed them as he pulled away from the hug and moved over to sit at the table. Let's eat. Hizashi agreed, taking the seat across from their husband. Itadakimasu. A quick stop at a nearby store and a bag of beef jerky later, the small group of 3 arrived in the UA staff parking lot. The little creature was curled up in Hizashi's lap, wrapped in a cocoon of blankets, and seemingly fast asleep as Shouta shut off the car's engine. He throws the keys in his pocket before exiting the vehicle, walking over to the other side, and opening the passenger door. Need a hand getting out? Shouta offered, which was met with a chuckle from his partner. Yes, please, Hizashi answered, carefully picking up the small bundle of fluff and handing them over to their husband. Brrhm? The little creature trilled as they began to squirm around in the blanket wrap. It's okay, little one. Shouta cooed, repositioning them carefully to be cradled in his arms. Look, baby. Everything's fine. You can go back to sleep for a bit longer. Hizashi explained as they lifted a corner of the blanket to let the little creature's head poke out and look around. The creature huffed, ducking their head under Shouta's capture weapon as they settled back down. Let's get them to Chiyo's office first, and depending on what she says, we can either go to Nizu's office or he can come to us. The blonde decided, grabbing both of their bags of paperwork and closing the car door behind them. Sounds like a plan. Shouta agreed. They began making their way through the parking lot and over to the underground tunnels that lead into the staff lounge. Exiting the tunnels and entering the room, they found it mostly empty. 13 was at their desk, grading papers. Snipe had his gun disassembled at his desk with cleaning supplies in hand. Vlad had just gotten up and was heading for the hallway door, most likely leaving so he could set up for class. The other teachers glanced at the couple. Nods and waves of acknowledgement were sent in their direction before they went back to what they had been doing a few moments earlier. Hizashi offered a good morning as they set their bags down on their desks. Shouta offered a grunt of acknowledgement before leaving the room and moving to Recovery Girl's office. They knocked on the sliding door, waiting a few polite seconds before pulling the door open. What can I do for you two this early into the school day? Chiyo asked, raising an eyebrow at the underground hero, then turned to his partner who was more likely to answer the question. Sho brought home another stray that some drunks had attacked, and we wanted to get them checked out to make sure they're okay, and he got all the glass out of them, Hizashi explained. Which earned them a look from the older woman. Why in heaven's name did you bring them to me? I'm a doctor, not a veterinarian. The healer scolded, as Shouta placed the blanket bundle onto an empty medical cot. They're a bit of a special case, Hizashi informed her hesitantly as if looking for the right words. The little creature wiggled around, trying to untangle their limbs from the blanket. It took them a few seconds, but they eventually got their front paws and head to peek out of the blanket. They wiggled the rest of the way free and began walking over to the edge of the bed, the blanket falling off their back as they moved farther away from it. Rah-ah. The little one greeted, sniffing the air around the new human. Oh my. I see what you mean. Chiyo agreed, slowly offering a hand out for them to sniff. Where was it that they were hurt? She asked as the creature hesitantly allowed for a gentle head pat, before backing away and moving to the underground hero's side. From what I could tell, the worst of it was their paws where they had stepped on pieces of glass, but there were also some thin slashes hidden along their back and chest by their fur, Shouta informed the doctor. He gave the little animal a gentle scratch behind the ear with one hand, and with the other, he gestured for Recovery Girl to come closer once more. Still, I'm no veterinarian. Even in a case like this, I would recommend taking them to an animal-specialized doctor. She explained, moving to the animal's side. She unwrapped the stethoscope from around her neck, offering it to the creature for investigation. While the little creature was sniffing the metal disc, their nose ended up touching the cold metal, causing them to sneeze, ducking their head as feathers and fur bristled. The healer chuckled. "Has Nizu seen them yet?" she asked, receiving a shake of the head from both. "No, not yet," Hizashi answered as the healer moved the cold metal disc to the creature's chest. "We wanted to make sure they were okay first." "Completely understandable, dear, but why don't one of you two bring him down here while I make a quick phone call to an old apprentice of mine? Whichever one of you stays can keep this little one company. How does that sound for a starting plan?" The youthful hero proposed. "Sounds good, Chiyo-san. That should be fine. Thank you, Chiyo-san." The healer shook her head. "I have yet to do anything worth thanking." She huffed, walking over to the desk to make the phone call. "Izuku is extremely tired. It's been cold and rainy for the past few moons. They have wasted far too much energy trying to gather enough food for the winter before everything hides away to hibernate. Yet, they still don't have enough food. It's a difficult task to gather enough food, but it was a necessary task in order to have the energy to survive until spring. Once the prey returns from hiding, it becomes a much simpler task. So, of course, it couldn't be easy for them to gather food in the moons leading up to the coldest winter moons. Humans have a tendency of scaring all of it off before there was ever a chance to catch it. So when the dark shadow human offered easy-to-gather food that wouldn't run away, Izuku took it. They should have been more cautious. It was their own fault for not really paying attention because soon after the shadow human ran out of food, they grabbed Izuku and held them captive. Sure, Izuku could have used their wings to break free from the human's hold, but that would waste more energy than it was worth. There was also the potential of causing more injuries to themselves, which led to using more energy to heal, which led back to not wanting to waste energy. Unlike some of the other animals around the city, Izuku doesn't hibernate. They're awake during winter just as much as any other time of the year. The main difference was the need to use stored energy instead of fresh energy due to a lack of food supply, which led back to the original problem, lack of food, which causes a lack of energy. Sure, the shadow human offered to give them more food if they calmed down, but that offer alone wouldn't have been enough to convince Izuku to listen. What did convince them was the whispered words that have saved them time and time again. Whispers that speak in riddles and rhymes, promising safety every time. So, Izuku allowed the human to take them wherever it was they were taking them. Izuku had been taken to be the shadow human's den. The human, as they promised, provided plenty of food for Izuku to convert into energy for the winter. They even took care of the sharp shards that had been digging into Izuku's skin uncomfortably. A new bright-colored human had entered the room and Izuku hissed, warning the stranger to not come any closer, only to receive a scolding from the dark shadow human. Izuku stared at the bright human, contemplating what the dark shadow human had said. They had to behave in order to get more food, but this new human was still new and had yet to do anything worth Izuku's trust. Sniffing the air to take in the new human scent, Izuku realized that it was the same as the faint scent on the dark shadow human. So the bright human wasn't new to the shadow human, which made sense given that they were currently in the shadow human's den. The bright human did something, flicking a switch on the wall, that made the room light up. The previous lighting was turned off in favor of the new brighter light. After a bit of time, the bright human moved closer and offered more of the food that the shadow human had been giving Izuku. They took the offered food quickly, understanding that the new human wasn't a threat, but was also unsure of the human's intention. Izuku continued to eat the offered food as the humans talked about something or other, holding a boring conversation using too many sounds in the way all humans seem to do. Eventually, they got up from where the shadow human had placed them, moving closer to the bright human to figure out why they had stopped giving Izuku the promised food. The bright human explained that there was no more food, with far too many, long drawn-out words and a frown. Izuku returned the sentiment, showing their disappointment with a long drawn-out sound of their own. When the bright human laughed, Izuku became unsure if they had truly understood what they had communicated. Huffing in response, Izuku sat back down instead of trying to continue the conversation. Eventually, the dark shadow human was shooed away by the bright human. They said something either to themselves or to Izuku, and had clearly been amused by whatever they had said. Izuku was going to question the human, but decided against it, allowing the human to pat them on the head. In the morning, there was a new sound that didn't belong to either human. It was a sound that Izuku was far more familiar with. The sound of trills and yowls for cubs and kits to get up and moving. The elders telling the young ones that it was time to eat, and to be quick, should they not want to miss a meal. The shadow human seemed to understand this too, preparing a plate of food for the cloud-like feline. Once the plate was offered to the cloud feline, they stopped talking to the human in favor of eating the food. The shadow human moved away from the feline, flicking on a switch that caused the room to light up once again. The human met Izuku's eyes and tells them something or other about not being allowed where they were. Izuku huffed, not really caring for the humans' rules that don't apply to them. Once again, the shadow human says something, speaking with too many words. A waste of energy in Izuku's opinion, as the human explains that it would be Izuku's fault for breaking the human's silly rules. Izuku informs the shadow human that they understand that their actions have consequences and that Izuku is willing to accept them should they be deserved. The dark shadow human looks at Izuku, really looks at them, before continuing to say something about a quirk, which definitely catches Izuku's attention. It's a word with so many meanings and too many emotions attached to them all. A brief flash of kind green eyes and gentle smiles invades Izuku's mind at the same time as harsh chemical smells, white coats, and spiraling emotions. Izuku shakes it off, tilting their head at the dark shadow human, watching as they talk to themselves. The shadow human moved around the room, opening metal doors that revealed more food hidden behind them. The human placed some foods on the same level as Izuku, asking what they want to eat. Excitedly, Izuku walks over to the food, sniffing around until they found a box with the right smell. The shadow human puts the rest of the food away, taking out another box of Izuku's chosen food, before having them move back to their previous spot. Food was placed in front of Izuku around the same time as the bright human came into this part of the den. The bright human speaks loudly to the shadow human at first but quiets down as their conversation continues. The humans are still talking, but it was more of a whisper. When Izuku looks over to check on the now quiet humans, they see the bright one nuzzling the shadow one affectionately, allowing their body to go almost limp in the shadow one's hold. A few things clicked into place as Izuku went back to eating. The bright human was the shadow human's mate. Now Izuku felt bad for their previous distrust of the bright one. They had probably just been worried over their mate, and from their point of view, the injured cub that said mate had brought into their den. Izuku jumped from their perch, allowing their wings to spread out as they glided down to the floor level. They walked over to the bright human seat and pawed at their leg until Izuku had their attention. Then, Izuku jumped up to the bright human's lap and curled up for a nap, letting out a low constant rumble of purrs to show the bright human that they were sorry for their previous behavior. The bright human cooed at them, placing a gentle hand on top of Izuku's head as they drifted off to sleep. The next time that Izuku woke up, they were in a completely new location that smelled a little too much like harsh chemicals. It took a bit of time and a waste of energy to get themselves untangled from the soft material, but when they did, Izuku was met with the sight of a new human. This one was much smaller than the shadow human and bright human. Izuku greeted the small silver human that smelt of faint chemicals and sweets. Their judgment was withheld so as to not make the same mistake as they had with the shadow human's mate. The small silver human held out a hand. Izuku leaned into the touch carefully before moving over to the shadow human side, where it was safer. Shadow human talked with too many words to the silver human as they scratched behind one of Izuku's ears. The silver human moved closer, offering the thing that had been around their neck. It was cold and smelled of that same harsh chemical smell as before. Their fur stood on end as feathers ruffled, ignoring the chill of spiraling emotions from a lifetime ago. The silver human placed the thing on Izuku's chest, holding it in place for a few moments before moving it to another place, and then removing it altogether. The thing was once again wrapped around the silver human's neck as they continued to talk to the bright and shadow human. The silver human then walked away to another part of the room. The shadow human also walked away, except, they walked out of the room completely. Izuku looked over to the bright human, tilting their head in questioning, only to have the bright human carefully pick them up and sat down with Izuku in their lap. Seeing that the bright human was content to watch over Izuku while they waited for their mate to return, Izuku went back to sleep, deciding that it was too early to be away for long anyway. Shouta returned to the nurse's office with the principal on his shoulder just as Chiyo got off the phone with her former apprentice. "Oh good, you're back." Recovery girl greeted, slipping her phone back into her pocket. "You're very lucky that Whisper just so happens to be in town. She'll be here in about half an hour or so, and has agreed to take a look at that stray of yours, as well as document them with the QAR. QAR? Hizashi echoed in a questioning tone. Quirked Animal Registry, Nizu explained, tapping Shouta twice on the head. The underground hero complied, lowering his boss to the floor. Similar to the quirk registry that humans use, with a few differences in the laws that apply to quirk usage and identification. Hizashi hummed, nodding their head in thanks for the explanation while running a gentle hand through the creature's fur. They feel more than hear the quiet rumble of purrs that the little creature let out. The continuous vibrations showed that the animal was clearly content with the attention as they slept peacefully in Hizashi's lap. "It's quite curious how calm they are for being a stray that was found being attacked on the streets," Nizu commented as he moved closer to observe the animal. "They're sleeping," Shouta pointed out. "Anyone can look deceptively calm when they're unconscious." Nizu nodded along but kept his eyes solely fixed on the small mutated animal. True enough, I suppose. True enough. They are sleeping. Which leads us to the question of why are they so comfortable sleeping in a supposedly new environment, not only surrounded by strangers but on a stranger's lap? Nizu countered. Shouta thought it over for a moment, glancing between Nizu and the creature. He then glanced between the creature and his partner. All he could offer to answer the principal was a shrug and a summary of the creature's behavior so far. They weren't this calm, to begin with. I had to bribe them with food to get them home. They also hissed and tried to claw at Zashi when they first met, but I bribed them with food again, and they behaved. Shouta informed his boss. Curious behavior for a supposedly wild animal. What kind of food did you give them? Nizu questioned, turning his bright beady eyes away from the creature for the first time since they had entered the room and over to Shouta. We've been using beef jerky as bribery, but Sho gave the little one some tofu this morning, Hizashi answered, trying to draw the principal's attention away from their husband. Using meat makes sense with the creature having the appearance of a predator, but tofu? What was your thought process behind that? Chio asked, looking up from the small stack of paperwork she had been going through. That's what the little one wanted, Shouta answered with a shrug, leaning his back against the wall with his arms crossed over his chest. Did they somehow ask for it? Chio asked with furrowed brows, sparing a glance at the creature that was still sleeping in Hizashi's lap. They haven't spoken human words if that's what you mean. Although, they do respond with cat-like sounds if you talk to them as if they're answering your question. Shouta explained lazily. I simply set some foods that they could potentially eat on the counter and asked the little one what they could eat. They looked around at the food before settling on the tofu, so that's what I gave them. Shouta explained, pushing off the wall and moving to the chair beside where Hizashi was sitting with the creature. Fascinating. Perhaps the tofu simply smelled the best out of all the options? Nizu suggested with a tilt of his head. Or maybe they did understand the question and pointed out their answer. An intelligence quirk perhaps? It's possible that they are answering you, but they don't have a way to overcome the language barrier. After all, intelligence does not equal easy communication. Although, I do wonder how an intelligence quirk would fit with their mutation. Then again, nothing is ever truly out of the question when it comes down to how a quirk functions or presents. The principal hummed, speaking more to himself than the people in the room. A knock on the office door interrupts Nizu's tangent on the possible quirk capabilities the creature could have based on how they have behaved so far, causing Recovery Girl to let out a grateful sigh of relief. Come in, Chio called, getting up from her desk and moving over to the creature's side. Looks like you got a full house here. The newcomer, a person with short curly blonde hair and some kind of antler mutation, joked as they entered, closing the door behind themselves. They sure know how to keep you busy, huh, sensei? Chio huffed in fond exasperation, gesturing for them to come over to her desk and take the small stack of papers attached to a clipboard, which the healer's former apprentice did. Please dear, I haven't been your teacher for almost 2 decades now. And I know I told you to call me Chio after you graduated. We're equals now, not student and teacher. The healer pointed, earning a chuckle from her former student. Whatever you say, teach. Chio rolled her eyes at that. Now, I suppose introductions are in order, yes? I'm Kota Kirari, but I go by Whisper out in the field. She, her pronouns, please, and thanks. Whisper introduced herself with a slight bow of her head. It's lovely of you to join us, Kota-san dash. Ah. None of that, Mr. Principal. Just call me Kirari. I'm not a big fan of formalities. Whisper interrupted with a grin. Hizashi had to stifle a laugh at the fact that someone had dared to interrupt Nizu. I'm Yamada Hizashi, they them, but feel free to call me Hizashi. The blonde greeted in a cheerful but quiet tone as they continued to run their hand through the small creature's fur. Sure thing, Hizashi. Kirari smiled, shooting a thumbs up at the spotlight hero. She raised a brow at the underground hero who had been quietly observing her from beside the blonde. Aizawa Shouta, him. Shouta offered with a tired sigh. Great. Now, where's the little guy, Kirari asked with a clap of her hands. The little creature startled in Hizashi's lap at the loud sound. Their head shot up to survey the room cautiously. A low growl emitting from them in place of the once calm purrs, as the other people in the room are only able to watch and see how they will react. Hello there. So sorry for disturbing your sleep, little friend. Whisper greeted in a soft voice. BRRHM? The little creature questioned with a tilt of their head as the growling ceased. I was called to check on you. Kirari cooed, moving to crouch down next to the creature. The creature huffed in response, setting their head back down but keeping an eye on the new person. I know, little one, but the faster we get this over with, the faster you can go back to sleep. Kirari pointed out. The little creature yawned before slowly crawling out of Hizashi's lap and onto the medical bed, shaking out their wings and fur before turning their attention back to Whisper. All right. Thank you, little friend. I'll be as quick as I can. Kirari murmured, offering a warm smile to the little animal. Let's move you to a solid surface so I can check you over physically. The creature gave a nod of their head and moved closer to the edge of the bed. They walked onto Whispered shoulders, settling around her neck like a scarf, much to everyone's surprise. The creature huffed once again, causing Kirari to laugh as she used the edge of the bed to stand up without losing balance. Can one of you grab 2 bowls of water and a few towels? Whisper asked as she walked up to what was supposed to be the teacher's assistant's desk and crouched down to let the creature walk off her shoulders and onto the desk. I'll take care of that, dearie, you just do what you can for now, Chio answered before disappearing into a back room. Kirari gave a nod of her head, placing the clipboard that had still been in her hand onto the desktop. Stand nice and tall on all 4 paws please. Kirari requested. Reaching into a pocket, she pulled out a flexible measuring tape and a pen. Chin up a bit more, Kirari instructed, gently placing a hand under the creature's chin, lifting it up until the animal was looking straight ahead. Ears up too. The little creature offered a displeased growl but complied nevertheless. I'll do your measurements first so the boring part's out of the way. Kirari offered with a smile, measuring from the desktop to the tip of their ear, then to the top of their head, and finally to the top of their shoulder. Both measurements were quickly marked down on the clipboard recovery girl had handed her before she moved on to measure the rest of the animal. From shoulder to shoulder. From hip to hip. Then from shoulder to hip on both sides. Measuring the circumference of their rib cage, the stomach area, and each leg. The circumference and length of their snout. The distance between their ears. The length of their tail. Everything but the wings was measured and marked down. At some point during the measurement, Chio returned with the bowls of water and towels. She placed the items down on her own desk so as to not disturb the veterinarian. Kirari didn't acknowledge that anything had changed with the environment. Her focus was purely on getting her current task done as soon as possible. By the end of the process, the creature was glaring at Kirari with narrowed eyes and sharp pupils. A low chattering sound emitting from them, even as they complied with every movement and measurement that was taken. That's it for now, little friend. You can relax. Kirari cooed, running a careful hand through the fur at the base of their neck. I know. That wasn't very fun. I'm sorry. The little creature flashed their teeth with one last growl as they turned away from her. Maybe you should give the baby some food, Sho, Hizashi suggested, drawing the attention of the creature their way. MMRR? The little creature questioned, head tilted to the side as their eyes trailed from the spotlight hero to their underground counterpart. Shoyuta let out a tired sigh, getting up from his spot and making his way over to the little animal. Is this what you want? Shoyuta questioned, pulling out a pack of beef jerky. The creature purred, rubbing their head against Shuta's shoulder as they walked in a single circle before sitting down. Can they have this? The underground hero asked Kirari after a moment of thinking. What is it? Beef jerky? Yeah, they can have it so long as it's unseasoned. Kirari answered with a nod, allowing Shoyuta to give some to the creature who happily munched away at the piece they were given. I'm going to take a look at your wings while you're eating, Kirari informed the animal, receiving a hum in response as Shoyuta gave them another piece of dried meat to distract them. Kirari grabbed a bowl and towel off of recovery girl's desk, placing them beside the creature, and dipped the edge of the towel in water. She started at the base of their wings and began to gently scrub any dust and debris free from their feathers. By the time their wings were clean, the little creature was purring like a car engine. The constant, pleased rumble showing just how much the condition of their wings had been affecting them. There we go. All clean. Kirari cheered as they nuzzled against her hands. The little creature happily accepting all of the pets and attention that Kirari was giving them. The creature gave a cheerful trill, jumping off the desktop to glide a lap around the room, showing off their freshly preened wings to those present. They landed on top of the tallest perch, which happened to be the blonde spotlight hero. Oof, hi there baby. Hizashi cooed, scratching at the base of their ear as the creature got comfortable on their shoulder. Fascinating. A completely flip in their personality. Nizu pointed out, drawing the little creature's attention. Dark emerald eyes glinted in the light as they tilted their head to the side curiously. HHMF? The creature huffed, leaning into the scratches that Hizashi continued to offer. I wouldn't say it's a complete flip. They were most likely just on edge the entire time and are only now starting to relax due to us helping them and not hurting them. Shoyuta remarked, content to watch his partner cradle the little creature in their arms and shower them with attention. A fair point to bring up. Nizu conceded. It's your point. I merely reintroduced it with different words. The underground hero pointed out. Excuse me, sorry to interrupt, but Chio-sensei noted down that the little one had sustained a few injuries prior to coming here. Kirari began, as she looked over the papers in hand. Yes? What about them? Shouta questioned, eyebrows furrowed in concern. There are none. There's a concerning amount of scars, but other than that, there wasn't a single open wound or scab to be seen. Kirari informed them. A healing ability? Shouta asked no one in particular. Definitely not outside the realm of possibility. I would suggest having someone with an identification quirk be brought in to see them. Kirari answered the underground hero. All right. Anything else? Shouta inquired, receiving a nod from the veterinarian. I'll need to draw some blood samples to have tested. Once I get the results back from that, I'll hand the QAR form to you to review, and once you give the go-ahead, I can submit the papers to be approved. Kirari explained. You can get the blood samples after they've calmed down. Most likely right before we head home and they've tired themselves out. Shouta decides, receiving a nod in agreement. I'll get the measurement for their wings before I draw their blood, but that should be all that's needed, Kirari informs him, watching the little creature turn ball of fur, feathers, and energy. Something tells me it won't take long to tire them out. I'd give them 10, maybe 15 minutes before they crash. Shouta chuckled. It was supposed to be a normal, boring day. The most interesting thing was supposed to be whatever happened on patrol at the end of the day, or potentially, the ethics finals that Shouta had been planning to grade that afternoon while he waited for Hizashi to get back from their radio show. There wasn't supposed to be anything special or unusual about the day, just paperwork and 2 sleeping animals keeping him company while he waited for his partner to get home. Of course, nothing ever goes the way Shouta expects it to, so the most interesting thing about the day was now between receiving the phone call from the police department about the little creature's test results, or the identification results sitting on the dining room table on top of the open case file it belonged to. Patrol and classwork were now long forgotten from the competition of the most interesting event the day as Shouta sat quietly in the seat across from the detective. How accurate is that? The underground hero inquired after what felt like an eternity of silence that lasted little more than a minute or two. 97? 98%? The detective sighed, trying to remember the correct probability. I don't recall the exact number, but all of the species' DNA matches have been accurate and the only false identity matches have been close bloodline relatives, Tsukachi admitted. Shouta thought it over for a moment, looking away from the detective to the little creature, who was apparently not a creature. With a tired groan, Shouta reached across the table and picked up the packet of test results. This says that they're mainly human. The eraser hero stated with furrowed brows, questioning the result more than the detective delivering them. According to that, the animal in your lap is actually a human kid with either a full mutation or a transformation quirk, Tsukachi confirmed, watching as the underground hero closed his eyes to take in a deep steady breath. I kidnapped a kid off the streets. Shouta pointed out in horror, staring between the not creature who was currently curled up asleep, cradled in his lap, and the paper packet. Tsukachi huffed out a tired laugh at the eraser hero's expense. Honestly? That was probably the best thing you could have done for them. At Shuta's incredulous look, the detective explained further. The kid's mom, Midoriya Inko, was killed in a mugging gone wrong. We had previously thought that the kid, Midoriya Izuku, had either gotten kidnapped or killed. However, Midoriya Izuku was never presumed dead due to the fact that the case was, forgotten about. Tsukachi explained, making sure to use quotation marks around forgotten. There was a brief pause as Shouta lifted his hand up to pinch the bridge of his nose, a frown pulling at his lips. Quirk discrimination? The underground hero spat in disgust, receiving a solemn nod from the detective. Why am I not surprised? Tsukachi raised a brow in Shuta's direction as if he was silently asking, really? Because you grew up in the quirkest mess of a system? The detective suggested, watching tiredly as Shouta slumped back in his chair. All right, smart butt. What are we supposed to do now? Tsukachi blinked, gesturing to the creature that wasn't a creature with a shrug. Attempt to eraser their quirk? With a sigh, Shouta gave a slight nod of his head. His eyes trailed away from the detective and the papers to the little, not creature that was curled up sleeping in his lap. His eyes flashed red as his quirk activates, nullifying all quirk factors within his line of sight. Nothing happens. The little, not creature stays a creature curled up asleep in his lap as if nothing had changed. Shouta allowed the red glow to fade away along with his quirk use, hair falling back onto his shoulders. Turning in the detective's direction, Shouta raised a brow in his direction, eye moving back to the not creature and then to the detective. Nothing happened. Tsukachi groaned, noting something down on his notepad. Now what? the underground hero asked, and wasn't that a great question? The little creature that was not a creature hadn't changed when Shouta deactivated their quirk. That meant that their quirk was a mutation, but the concept of a human being completely changed into an animal fell under the transformation category. Usually, Eraser still worked on transformation types. We could bring in someone with an identification quirk? Whisper had noted it down in the recommendations on what to do if the blood results weren't of any use. Tsukachi suggested, running a hand through his hair as he leaned farther against the backing of the chair. We can't really do much else unless the kid changes back to a human. And if they can't change back? Shouta inquired, receiving a strained look from the detective. Then we go to Nizu and work from there. Tsukachi shrugged, earning a nod from the underground hero. How long would it take to bring someone with an identification quirk in? Shouta asked, completely ignoring the silent dreading that created a pause in their conversation. Tsukachi pulled out his phone, typing a few things in before looking back up at Shouta. There's no one with that type of quirk in the area as of right now. The detective informs him, scrolling a little further down as his eyes return to his screen. It will probably take a few days for the request to process, and from there, a few weeks for them to get back to us. Shouta hummed in acknowledgement, staring blankly into the papers that were still in sight. There were a few other packets in the case folder he had yet to look through, but he didn't have the energy to do that at the moment. The entire conversation had left Shouta feeling drained of energy. He either needed a couple more cups of coffee, or he needed a long, uninterrupted nap. Eraser? The mentioned hero hummed, turning to look back at the detective. Will Midoriya Izuku be staying in your custody, or will I need to find someone else to take them in? Tsukachi asked, pausing briefly before quickly throwing in, it's fine if the kid needs to stay with someone else. Taking care of a creature is a lot different mentally than taking care of a kid stuck as an animal. I'll talk to Hizashi when they get home, but they'll probably be fine with the little one staying until everything gets figured out, Shouta explained with another shrug, and it was really starting to feel like the majority of this conversation was a mixture of tired sighs and shrugs. Alright then. I'll forward you the necessary paperwork for an emergency foster as well as any additional information on this case. The Eraser hero hummed once more, watching as the detective stood up and left, leaving Shouta alone in his apartment with a cat and a creature kid. Izuku decided that they liked Shadow Human, Bright Human, and their den. Sure, it was strange to end up in a new location every time they woke up. The first time had been Shadow Human's den, to begin with. Next, they were moved to one of the moving metal things, and from there they were moved to the bad chemical room. They always ended up back at the Shadow Human's den at the end of each trip to a new location. Although, they hadn't taken enough trips to test if they truly always returned to the den after a trip somewhere. The one part that Izuku wouldn't mind leaving out of being moved to a new place by Shadow Human was meeting new humans. Every time they changed locations, there was a new human so far, and while Bright Human is nice, they could do without the other humans that just kept poking them. A little less humans would probably help Izuku to fully relax instead of waking up with stiff muscles from how often they've been tensing them. Sadly, it didn't look like Izuku was getting their wish anytime soon, because while there was no moving to new locations, there was still a new human. The entrance to Shadow Human's den opened with a click, waking Izuku up from their nap. A quick survey of the area revealed that Bright Human was nowhere to be seen, and most likely had left the den at some point between when Izuku had gone to sleep and when they had woken up. Looking over to the den entrance, Izuku observes as Shadow Human let the new human who wore a hat and long coat into the den. The new human removed their outside feet and walked over to the table with Shadow Human and took a seat, placing a thick stack of paper packets on the table. After some careful consideration, Izuku decided to join them. Jumping up onto Shadow Human's lap, they curled up to sleep once again as the humans began to talk in the only way they seemed to know how to, with far too many words. It was boring and a waste of energy to even attempt to try and keep up with what they were talking about, so Izuku closed their eyes and let the constant speech filter into the background. When they woke up for the 5th time that day, it was once again to the click of the den entrance clicking as it closed. The hat human no longer in sight. It made sense that the hat human must have been the one to leave, seeing as there weren't any other changes in the environment. Another quick look around the area showed that nothing, not even Shadow Human, moved for a long few blinks. Time only unfroze to allow Shadow Human to drop their head onto the table with a loud thunk. The papers that the hat human had left behind did nothing to cushion the impact between the human's head and the wood. Izuku nudged Shadow Human, once, twice. They didn't lift their head back up or move at all. If it wasn't for the constant rise and fall of Shadow Human's chest, and the continuous beating of their heart, Izuku might have gotten worried. Instead, Izuku jumped down from their lap and began to wander around the den. They hadn't had time to fully explore anything more than the main area of the den, so they started to head down a hallway to explore. The cloud-like feline didn't seem to appreciate Izuku's wondering, appearing out of nowhere, and ended up snatching them up by their scruff. There was no point in arguing with the elder feline. That was one of the first things Izuku had learned out on their own. So there Izuku hung, limbs having gone limp as soon as cloud-like elder's jaw had dug into their scruff. They allowed the feline to move them as they pleased and ended up settling on the couch with the elder curled around them. Trapped in the protective warmth of the cloud elder, Izuku easily falls back into the void of sleep after casting one last glance at the shadow human. Time passes and the entrance to the den clicks open once more. This time, it was Bright Human who entered the den, calling out a greeting as they closed the entrance behind themselves. They take off their outdoor feet before walking over to Shadow Human and carefully runs a hand through their mate's hair in slow soothing motions. Cloud Elder lets out a trilled hum in greeting, blinking at Bright Human a few times. A yawn escaped them, showing off sharp canines for all of 2 seconds. Then they turned their attention away from Bright Human and started fussing over Izuku, grooming the fur at the top of their head. While Izuku huffed in protest, turning away from Shadow Human and their mate to look at the elder. Knowing that they aren't old enough to be considered anything but a kid in Cloud Elder's eyes, that was all the protest they gave. Bright Human cooed, taking out their small device that made a few clicking sounds before putting it back where they had taken it out from. Whether it was the Bright Human's voice or the loud quick succession clicking, Shadow Human was woken up. They stood up from the table and pulled their mate into their arms. The pair speak to each other in low voices as the Shadow Human leaned deeper into their mate, hiding their face in the crook of their neck. It was almost like Shadow Human thought that was the safest place to be, hidden away from the world in their mate's arms. Bright Human hums contently, swaying them as if a gentle breeze was moving them entirely on its own. Something Shadow Human says causes the Bright Human to tense. All movement ceased as their head whipped around to look in Izuku's direction. They say something, staring at Izuku like they expected them to say something back. Ignoring the human's weird behavior, Izuku went back to sleep. Shouta had found Midoriya Izuku in the early morning hours on November 27th. The kid was identified as, well, a kid, a little over a week later thanks to the blood work Whisper had sent in for what was supposed to be a simple species identification test for the QAR forms. With the kid identified, the cold case regarding the Midoriyas was able to be closed properly this time. When Tsukachi had sent over the paperwork for the emergency hero foster, he also sent over a time, date, and place for Midoriya Izuku's quirk identification appointment, along with a note addressed to Hizashi congratulating them on finally convincing their husband to have a kid. And while Hizashi and Shouta had both been amused, more exasperated in the Underground Heroes case, the couple had also stopped to consider that yes, they were taking in a kid. An actual, most likely traumatized, child, who wasn't just another stray animal off the streets as Shouta had thought originally. This wasn't something that they should be rushing into, despite the fact that they most definitely were doing just that, and completely out of what would be considered the appropriate order. In the couple's defense, it all just sort of happened, and they were in all likelihood going to foster to adopt the child in question anyway with how attached they had become, both the couple and the kid. The guest room had been converted into a more feline and avian-friendly environment with plenty of perches now decorating the walls. New furniture had been picked out along with some grooming products Whisper recommended when asked. Hizashi had even picked out a few outfits for the kid to wear, well, more than a few really, but seeing as Izuku allowed the loud blonde to dress them up and take all the pictures they desired, usually preening under the attention, it was, probably, fine. Izuku's quirk identification appointment ended up being almost a month after the kid had been taken into the Aizawa household, on December 21st at 11:35 in the afternoon. This means if they were lucky, there was a possibility that the couple could have everything regarding their new kid squared away before Christmas or at the very least, the new year. Then again there was no guarantee that identifying what exactly the kid's quirk is and how exactly it works will be of any help without at least a few months of training said quirk, but everyone has to start somewhere. The day of the appointment arrives and as usual, at least for the past month, Cotton Ball and Izuku are the first two awake, followed by Shouta who feeds them before moving on to making breakfast for himself and his partner. Hizashi is once again the last one awake and is greeted by a kiss on the cheek from their husband. A cup of hot black coffee with cinnamon was placed gently into their hands, and whatever breakfast Shouta decided to make was set on the dining table. The morning was calm and peaceful while they ate, or at least until Izuku started demanding attention, jumping up onto the table with a soft trill. "Izuku, we've talked about this. No going on the table." Hizashi huffed before taking a sip of their coffee. In response, the kid jumped off the table, taking flight as they glided around the room, coming back to land on the blonde's shoulders and began nudging insistently at their cheek. All right, let's go get you ready for the day. Hizashi chuckled, reaching a hand up to pet the fur behind Izuku's ear. They stood up with the kid still on their shoulders, sharing an amused look with their husband who had forgotten to turn off the camera shutter sound on his phone, then disappeared down the hallway and into the kids' room. Izuku jumped down, trotting over to their closet to pull out a piece of clothing that was essentially an oversized hoodie made for dogs and cats that Shouta had customized to include holes for Izuku's wings. And while yes, Izuku could have gotten dressed earlier by themselves, with a lot of wiggling, struggling, and frustration, it was most definitely easier with a helping hand, which Hizashi and Shouta are more than happy to provide. Halfway through the blonde brushing out Izuku's fur, Shouta came in dressed in a soft, almost pastel, yellow put your hands up sweatshirt and black cargo pants. He took over the grooming, allowing Hizashi to get changed and ready for the day. Once everyone was ready to go, they left, making their way to the car for the long drive to the location of the appointment. They ended up stopping for a slightly early lunch, knowing that they would be stuck without food for a while during the appointment, and in all honesty, neither adult was too sure how long the visit would last, so it was better safe than sorry. They arrived at the tall building consisting of multiple floors, and had an appearance similar to that of a small hospital. Inside the building was a different story, with the interior appearing more like an expensive science lab the further one walks inside. There was a reception area where Shouta checked them in, and then they waited. Midoriya Izuku? One of the employees with long purple hair pulled into a high ponytail and a white coat, presumably a doctor, called out. Izuku perked up at their name, glancing suspiciously at the person who wasn't Shouta or Hizashi. The underground hero picked them up and the small group followed after the purple-haired doctor. Here we are. The doctor informs them, gesturing for the group to enter the room, which they did, the door sliding shut behind them. All right then. I apologize for the wait. Dr. Monoma's previous appointment is running long. I'm Shinso Saki, she/her pronouns. The purple-haired doctor introduced herself. I'll be the quirk analyst and assistant physician working with Monoma-senpai on Midoriya-kun's case. She gestured for Shouta to set the avian feline down on the examination bed and he compiled. Are there any questions before we begin? The married couple glanced at each other, communicating silently in a way that takes years of knowing someone and knowing everything about them to understand one another. What should we be expecting out of this? Hizashi asked after receiving a shrug from their husband. Well, you should expect this appointment to be more along the lines of a very thorough quirk counseling session instead of a doctor's appointment. However, we will most likely be taking saliva, blood, fur, and feather samples at the bare minimum for DNA and genetic testing. Shinso paused in her answer, glancing at the avian feline. Speaking of, would you mind if I gather those samples now so they have time to process in the lab? That way you won't be stuck here forever. The doctor jokes, waiting for a response. Once Izuku nods their head in agreement, Shinso moves over to the cabinets, pulls out the necessary objects, then turns to the sink, washing her hands and pulling on a pair of gloves. She began collecting the samples she had mentioned and continued on with her answer. Monoma-senpai will use his quirk to gather as much information on Midoriya-kun's quirk as he can, and then we will compare it to their family's quirk history, which we've already requested and received the last of the files 3 days ago, so we will be able to review and look for the correlation between Midoriya-kun's quirk and the previous quirk presentations within their family line. As for physical testing, we will be hooking Midoriya-kun up to a few different monitors and have them run through what is essentially the basic physical education apprehension test while using their quirk. We'll start with the 50-meter dash, then grip strength, standing long jump, repeated side step, ball throw, sit-ups, seated toe touch, and finish off with a distance run using a self-propelled treadmill for more accurate results. There was a knock on the door and a moment later it slid open, revealing another doctor with short blonde hair and bright blue eyes. Hello. I do apologize for my tartness, but I see Shinsu-san has already gotten you settled in. The blonde greeted, surveying the room with a nod of his head. I'm Monoma Tomo, he/him pronouns, and the quirk identifier that will be working with you. You must be Eraserhead, yes? Or would you prefer I address you by your civilian name? The blonde questioned, holding out a hand. Call me Aizawa. I'd rather not be addressed by my hero name while out of costume. The underground hero decides, reaching out to shake the offered hand. Shinso slipped out of the room with the samples she collected, nodding to the group as she left. I have to say, out of all the unstable quirks I've had to assess, this is quite surprising that our first meeting would be over a relatively stable quirk, Aizawa-san. The hero in question shrugged, so the doctor offered a shrug of his own and continued on, turning his attention to the other blonde in the room. I'm sorry, but I'm afraid I don't know who you are. Eraserhead-san was the only one listed in Midoriya-kun's file. Oh. Don't worry about it. I'm Aizawa Hizashi, they-them pronouns please and thank you. The blonde hero introduced themselves. Ah, so you're Eraserhead's spouse, that makes sense. My apologies, I've only ever had a handful of emergency hero fosters bring in their partners, so please don't mind my surprise. Monoma explained sincerely with a bow of his head. Before Hizashi could wave off the doctor's apology, he had already switched topics, turning his full attention to the avian feline that had been watching the whole interaction curiously. Izuku then looked away from the conversation when there was once again a knock on the door. Shinso re-entered the room but stayed along the back wall as if waiting for something. If it's all right with you Midoriya-kun, the doctor began, drawing Izuku's attention back to them. I'll be using my quirk now, Monoma informed them, stepping up to the side of the bed, waiting for a response before using his quirk. BRHM. The kid trilled, tilting their head to the side. Monoma glanced over at the Aizawas for an indication as to what was said. Are you asking why or what his quirk is? Shouta questioned in return, earning a huff and a pawing motion in the blonde doctor's direction. Ah, of course. My apologies, I've not been around many felines or canines that could be used as references. As for my quirk, it's a touch-based identification quirk that allows me to immediately know what a quirk is and how it works, or in some cases, how it's supposed to work, and then I help my patients fix whatever is going wrong with their quirk. Monoma explained. Izuku nodded their head and allowed the doctor to come closer in order to use his quirk. The doctor placed a hand on Izuku's shoulder, his eyes glowing white, faded to a bluish color, then disappeared. He then walked over to the counter, grabbing a clipboard with paper and a pen to write something down. How interesting. Midoriya-kun's family charts please. The doctor requested, extending the hand not currently writing. Shinso handed over the charts and went back to waiting. Is there something wrong? Hizashi asked anxiously, scratching behind Izuku's ear. Oh no, not at all, just, not what I had been expecting. How so? The eraser hero inquired. I originally thought they would have a heteromorphic type, but it's not. Monoma informs the heroes without bothering to look up from the charts he's reading. Really? Hizashi asked in surprise, while Shouta blinked, once, then twice, as he absorbed the new informations. If Midoriya-kun's quirk was a heteromorphic type, which it isn't, it would have to have been from their paternal quirkine, seeing how the maternal quirk line doesn't have any heteromorphic quirks, they're all emitters. Of different classifications, but still, all emitters. The paternal side, however, is of a draconic line, which is unique for being created from a very rare mutation in the main quirk gene sequence that has to occur in first-generation quirk users. It's a quirk type that can't be created outside of the families that currently exist due to all first generations having died out by now. It tends to be the dominate gene in order to ensure the continuation of the draconic lines. However, there are always more complications when it comes to PRGNNCY involving that bloodline, so the families are rather small and few. From what the records show, the paternal side, the Sensei family, starts with a first-generation scale and flame quirk. The resulting quirk was something far too similar to the pre-quirk mythical dragons, thus establishing them as a draconic bloodline. From there, an amphibian heteromorphic quirk joins, causing the draconic line to lean towards the water element with water vapors. Another fire quirk joined, creating a smoke dragon quirk, and then a fire spitter quirk joined, creating the fire-breathing draconic quirk that belonged to Midoriya-kun's father. A rather strong presentation of the draconic line that should have been the dominate sequence that was passed on to Midoriya-kun, but it wasn't. The quirk that they have is a transformation quirk, which classifies as an emitter type, surprisingly falling in line with the recessive gene sequence from the maternal side. A transformation type? Then wouldn't Izuku have changed back when Shouta used his quirk on them? Nothing happened when he did. Hizashi pointed out, looking between their husband and the doctor. Interesting, we will test that in a moment. For now, I would like to finish going over the quirk family history and the information from my quirk. Monoma informs them. Of course. Sorry for the interpretation. The heroes apologized. Monoma nodded, looking back over the Midoriya family's charts. On the maternal side of the Midoriya family, it looks like the main line, which is the Midoriya family, are mental emitters. Oh, here we go. Midoriya-kun's grandmother, who married into the Midoriya family, did have a transformation quirk, but it was a temporary transformation into different animals, with a time limitation. Monoma explains, looking up from the paperwork to place a hand on Izuku once again, activating his quirk, letting his eyes glow a white that faded to blue once more. Their quirk seems to be pulling heavily on the recessive genes from the Maternal side, specifically, from the maternal grandmother, but it does look like the draconic gene is present as well. For example, instead of multiple animals to transform into, Midoriyukuin has a single form, and it's a pure transformation, not just a temporary alteration. There also seems to be a knowledge enhancement, although, not an intelligence enhancement. Monoma furrowed his brows, removing his hat to once again check over one of the charts. He nodded along to something he read, then placed his hand on Izuku to continue. I wouldn't be surprised if it's some kind of foresight ability, especially since of the quirks that are in their bloodline, and not just married in, are of that emitter classification. Midoriyukuin's great-grandmother had a déjà vu quirk, their great-uncle had an intuition quirk, and their first cousin once removed has a foresight quirk. The odds of this enhanced knowledge ability being something along those lines is stacked in Midoriyukuin's favor. Izuku trilled at that, pulling away jerkily to jump onto an unsuspecting Shouta, earning a grunt from the underground hero, and a startled laugh from Hizashi. "Hi, baby. Whatcha doing?" Hizashi cooed, reaching over to under Izuku's chin, which the little one leaned into. "I suppose you're pleased with the possible foresight ability?" The doctor chuckled. Izuku huffed, shaking their head in denial, then jumped down into the floor and stood behind Shouta, much to everyone's confusion. The little one nudges at Shuta's leg until he took a step forward, but that didn't seem to be enough for them, so Shouta took another, and then another, and another, until the underground hero was just walking around the room with the little one following him. It was an adorable sight, but still, overall, confusing. "I'm so sorry. I don't understand, Midoriyukuin. I know you're trying to communicate something and I appreciate that you're trying, but I'm at a lose here. Like I mentioned earlier, understand animals really is my forte." Monoma apologized profusely. This earns him a glance from Izuku who huffs, pausing in their little game of following the leader. Shouta was about to stop walking as well, seeing as Izuku was done following him around, but then the little one started to follow him again. "You're following Shouta?" Hizashi states, which was obvious to everyone, but perhaps saying it out loud would help them understand what Izuku's trying to communicate. "Izawa-san, did Izuku-kun follow you home?" Shinso asked from where she was still leaning against the back wall. "Not exactly." Shouta shrugged at the same time Izuku let out an excited chirp, trotting over to Shinso to rub against her leg once before returning to the examination table like none of the past 10-12 minutes had happened. "So, you followed Shouta home. Because of foresight? You somehow knew to do that?" "Instinctually?" Monoma hesitantly guessed, which earned a nod from Izuku, who looked quite pleased with himself. "All right then, that's that proven I guess? Thank you Shinsu-san. Let's continue." With a hand back on Izuku, and eyes glowing white, then blue, Monona continued going through the little one's quirk. "Overall, I don't see there being many issues with their quirk, but it was noted that they have yet to change back into human form. Do either of you know approximately how long Midoriyukuin has been stuck like this?" The doctor inquired, looking up from his clipboard. Both heroes answered in the negative. "All right then. How about you Midoriyukuin?" Monoma asked, earning a questioning tilt of the head from the kid. Do you perhaps know how old you are?" The blonde doctor tried, and Izuku shook their head no. "Do you remember your mother?" The question earned him a hostile glare from the underground hero and a concerned glance from the spotlight hero, but to the Aizawa's surprise, there was an affirmative answer from the avian feline. Good. Did you have a quirk at any point when you were with your mother?" Another answer in the negative was marked down on the doctor's clipboard. "Well, that at least gives us a timeline, but also leaves anywhere from the ages 6 to 11 for Midoriyukuin's quirk to have manifested," Monoma informs them as a knock was heard. The door opens to reveal a nurse who handed over a new file. "Thank you, let's see." The doctor mumbled, reading over the content of the file. "It looks like the closest match for Midoriyukuin's quirk is a mythical creature known as a sphinx. Their fur matches that of a lion, and their feathers that of a hawk. Genetical they match a human and not an animal, despite being in animal form, interestingly enough. So we are back into the realm of pre-quirk mythical creatures, just not that of a draconic one. Izuku's feathers also seem to act like a plant, I suppose. Taking in and storing solar energy, which is probably what is used to transform. The stored energy is most likely reason why they heal so fast, in addition to their infrequent appetite. I wouldn't be surprised if Midoriyukuin could survive off of sunlight instead of food, but let's not test that, shall we? I expect them to be following the dietary plan that will be assigned by the nutrition lab." The file was closed and placed on top of the clipboard, which were both handed over to the doctor's assistant that was still standing patiently in the back of the room, and had retuned to taking her own notes after the follow the leader game was figured out. But back to the topic of transformation. Monoma turns his full attention back to Izuku. Do you remember being human back when you were with your mother? Izuku tilted their head but after a second, nodded their head. Can you picture yourself as a human? Another nod of the head, but this one was far more hesitant. Here, does this help? Monoma inquired, showing Izuku a picture of them as a human child that was attached to their file. Izuku whined, but nodded their head again. Is there any energy you can feel flowing though you? Perhaps along your larger veins? Maybe in your chest? It should be either warm or buzzing. Perhaps even a mix of the two. Another nod from Izuku, who looked to be deep in concentration, which was adorable, as the little avian feline pouts with their head dropped so they can stare at the picture of themselves that was on the table in front of them. Good. The blonde doctor cheered, offering a small closed-mouth smile. Now Midoriya-kun, this is very important. Monoma began, crouching down to be at eye level with the avian feline. Can you imagine being a human while tugging on that warm buzzing feeling? Try spreading the feeling through your whole body. The doctor instructed. Can you do that? Izuku huffed but nodded their head, agreeing to try, and with that Monoma stood back up and walked over to Shouta's side. Eraserhead, leave them be unless I say otherwise. Monoma orders with the same small smile he had offered Izuku, except now there was something sharp to it. Okay. The underground hero agreed easily enough. The group waited for several minutes, and just as Hizashi opened their mouth to say something, the little sphinx grew. Their wings, ears, and tail shrank down until all that was left was a child sitting crisscross with long curly green hair, wide green eyes, and too small clothing. Very good. Monoma complimented Izuku, earning an owlish blink and a shrug from the child, who shifts uncomfortably. Now, do either of you have questions about the specifics of Midoriya-kun's quirk? If not, I'll be handing the rest of this appointment over to my assistant, seeing as my quirk is no longer needed, and leaving you with the homework of practicing shifting at home for 10 to 20 minutes a day, based on the time it took for Midoriya-kun to complete this shift. Monoma says, waiting for a response as he walked over to a cabinet and takes out a set of children's hospital gown and pants, handing them over to the small child so they could change into something more comfortable. No, we should be fine. Thank you. Hizashi laughs, not taking their eyes off of their kid. We'll be in touch if Izuku has any issues in the future, Shouta informs the doctor. Alright, then have a lovely day, Monoma says with a nod of his head, turning to leave. Monoma-sensei, Shouta calls hesitantly. Blue Eyes turned to meet his with a raised brow. Thank you for your help. The underground hero bowed his head. It's no problem at all, Eraserhead-san. I'm glad I could be of assistance, the blonde doctor smiled and then left. Okay. The bathroom is just down the hall, or we can leave the room and you can change in here. Then we can go over the notes and I'll run a proper physical as well as the assessment testing we talked about earlier. Shinso says, stepping away from the wall and up to the patient's bed. A packet of papers were handed over to Shouta at the end of Izuku's appointment, which seems to be an unfortunately common theme as of lately, handing him more and more paperwork. This time, the papers in question were a copy of Izuku's test results. A quick skim through revealed Izuku's family quirk and medical history, along with the genetic and physical test results. There was also a section that explained Izuku's quirk. Part of that section was the official file that will need to be registered with the quirk registry, and another part was theories and things to look out for, all signed off by Monoma-sensei, as the doctor who had been overseeing Izuku's appointment. The theory that Shouta was most interested in was on why Eraser didn't work, despite Izuku apparently not having a heteromorphic quirk. It was a rather simple thing that Shouta hadn't considered because Eraser had worked on other transformation quirks before. The theory is that Izuku's body registers both forms as their baseline. No quirk activation was needed to hold one form over the other. Only when Izuku was switching between the two forms was their quirk active, disregarding the emitter aspect that was able to be turned off with Eraser. Medical tests show that Izuku is technically healthy. Sure, they're a bit underweight, and on the shorter side when in human form, but they still fall within the low normal range, so technically Izuku's fine in that capacity. Which was odd for a kid that had been living on the streets for a majority of their life, but made enough sense when Shouta considered that Izuku had most likely just acted like any other stray cat and went hunting for food. Although, they could apparently collect and store solar energy, so that might have been used to supplement whatever Izuku found to eat. Perhaps solar energy was even the main source of the little one's nutrients, and the actual food that they found was being used as a supplement. Either way, Shouta has instructions on what the little one's diet should look like, and it consists mainly of meats, fruits, and vegetables. Starches and sweets, such as candies and chocolates, are listed as something to avoid, but not too dangerous in small quantities, which is good to know in advance in case Izuku eats something and gets sick. The physical tests were interesting to say the least. It took Izuku 10-ish minutes, although it might have been closer to 20 minutes, to get used to their human form. Walking around on two legs gave them quite a bit of trouble until they were able to adjust to that type of movement, but Izuku seems to be rather adaptable, which allowed them to actually run through all the tests instead of doing a gloss over and sending them to a physical therapist. Running the tests in their human form shows that Izuku was faster, stronger and more flexible than a baseline human of the same age, height and weight. All common things for people with a feline heteromorphic quirk. They were definitely a little more clumsy while in human form, but they're fairly balanced, another thing that's common in feline quirks. Their stamina wasn't great, but Shinso wasn't sure if that was due to being on the streets for so long, or if Izuku was simply of a feline class that was suited for fast action over short distance types of exercise. Overall, the little one was, strangely, healthy, with no big concerns beside getting used to a new routine and practicing their shifting between forms. Something that Izuku had done excitedly when asked to switch back to their Sphinx form so they could run the course again, but then they stayed in Sphinx form. Obviously, that was the form they were most comfortable in, so the transformation was definitely going to use some work. Once a week they had Izuku change back into human form. They let the kid move around at their own pace, but the rule was that they had to stay human for the full 24 hours, from after they woke up in the morning to the same time the next morning. Suffice to say, the little one was not pleased with this arrangement. They became rather squirmy when in human form, which was a stark difference from their sleepy little avian feline that was fine hanging out on either of their guardian's shoulders. Like a scarf, and in Shouta's case, buried in with his scarf. Izuku also ate far more food when in their human form. Their intake of food increased so much in human form that they brought them to see Chiyo, just to be safe. "I'm not sure what you're expecting." Chiyo huffed at the two heroes, but gently patted Izuku's bush of long curly green hair. The little one leaned into the touch, pleased with the small show of affection. It might also help that Chiyo wasn't wearing her white coat, something that they have learned Izuku wasn't a fan of. That and hospital disinfectants, which leaves the couple with a few questions about what traumatic experience they had at a hospital. Izuku's feathers absorb solar energy and they can use that as food. Chiyo reminds them, then turns to the little one in question. "Which you should not be relying on," she scolds, turning to face the adults once again. "Increase their overall food intake, in both forms. Perhaps make the serving smaller but more frequent. Just something to snack on. That should help bring Izuku's weight up a bit." So Izuku's meals were altered to be smaller but more frequent. Hizashi and Shouta have both taken to keeping Sphinx-safe snacks on them or in nearby cold storages. A thing of cheese cubes. Some jerky. Bags of small fruits like grapes, blueberries, blackberries, and raspberries. Bags of cut vegetables, like carrot sticks, celery sticks, and cucumber slices. They've also taken to keeping cubed meat and tofu in the fridge. The time that Izuku just ate the meat cubes raw may have freaked Hizashi out for a split second as they worried over whether Izuku would get sick from it or not, but it was decided to be fine seeing as Izuku was used to eating raw mice or bird that they hunted in the city. Another thing to worry about, but they checked with Chiyo again, and she gave the all clear, handing over some grapes to Izuku while bonking the two heroes on the head with her staff. So this is what being a parent is like. Hizashi must after another freak out where they had brought Izuku to be checked over by Chiyo, once again, this time for the little one's abnormal sleep schedule. Izuku liked sleeping all day and being awake at night, and no one quite knows why. Chiyo was puzzled for a second, then decided that it was most likely that Izuku would sleep in the sun to eat while living on the streets, and had messed up their circadian rhythm, or was just nocturnal naturally, but otherwise, nothing to worry about. They got some red range and blue range lights for Izuku's room to see if that would help since plants like it, and two doctors have compared Izuku's solar absorption to photosynthesis, and that surprisingly did help in making Izuku sleepy, but there were no benefits from the lights. Still, they kept them so that Izuku would at least nap at night for a couple hours. Shouta hummed tiredly, opening his eyes to look up at his partner from where his head was resting in their lap. The little sphinx sleeps peacefully on top of Shouta's chest. All the worrying and constant panic to make sure the little baby's okay, that's what it's like being a parent, right? Hizashi murmurs, running a hand through their husband's hair. "Yeah, that sounds about right." Shouta chuckles, earning a huff from Izuku who moved slightly, then resettled once Shouta stopped moving. They sit in the quiet for a while longer, just enjoying each other's company as they relax on the living room couch. The apartment wasn't in any way decorated for Christmas, but no one in the Aizawa household seemed to mind. They had gone shopping for fresh food and ingredients for each of their favorite dishes, and then they all had a hand making food on Christmas Eve. Izuku stayed in their human form for the whole thing, curiously helping where they could, and eagerly learning how to make some of the food from Shouta. Hizashi made sure to get lots of pictures with the two of them cooking, and Shouta made sure to return the favor when they started baking and Hizashi took over as the better baker of the two. Izuku seemed to have had a lot of fun making everything, snaking on the ingredients as they went, and now they were in a cuddle pile on the couch. This was definitely not how Hizashi and Shouta thought their year could end, but it was definitely a pleasant surprise, and Izuku is making a wonderful addition to the Aizawa household. High school entrance exam season is a chaotic and stressful time for most teenagers, especially those looking to get into hero-oriented schools, as these tend to be very selective courses when it comes to choosing their students. After all, the chosen students will be the future heroes that they have to offer to the public. The top 5 hero schools are as follows. At 5th place, CI Academy, an all-female boarding school with a special focus in intelligence and support. In 4th place is Seijin Academy, a ninjutsu specialized school that focuses heavily on physical training aspects over quirk aspects. 3rd on the list is Ketsubutsu Academy which, uniquely, doesn't specialize in any individual skill or aspect. 2nd on the list of hero schools in Japan is Shiketsu Academy, known for its uniform and military teaching style. Ranked first, not only in Japan, but internationally as well, is UA High School, which is simply known for their hero program in general. And Izuku applied for all of their hero programs. All 5 hero schools received his school transcript and 4 of them had invited her to attend their entrance exams. Seijin Academy had reached their limit for hero course applications, but had invited them to take any of their other course department exams. CI was a close call, seeing as their invitation number had been at the tail end of what they usually accepted, but she had just made it in time before the application cut off and so they had gotten an invitation to their hero course entrance exam. It made sense that the smaller 2 of the 5 schools he had applied to would have a smaller number of invitations to give out to applicants. They're just lucky to have only missed one of the deadlines. UA's exam is first in the timeline set up for all high school exams, so that everyone that failed to get into that hero course has a chance to get into another school's hero course. Which is great for the other students, but horrible for Izuku since the Aizawa family had just arrived at UA for said early entrance exam. Breath, little one. You'll do just fine. Shouta reminded the avian in an attempt to calm down the trills and pitiful half-mews that sounded more like squeaks. Which only serves to rile Izuku up more. Hopping into the back seats to start pacing instead of just squirming in Hizashi's lap. Oh, let the baby be, Sho. I'm pretty sure we were both just as nervous when we took the exam. Hizashi pointed out, earning an eye roll from their husband. I'm sure we were, but the little one needs to calm down so they can switch forms for the paper test. Shout's reasons, and unfortunately for Izuku, it was sound reasoning. Pausing in his pacing, Izuku turned to stare at their parents, with a last pitiful whine. I know baby. The old grump is being a meanie. Hizashi cooed, leaning over their seat, into the back, and scooping Izuku back up into their lap. Running a soothing hand through her feathers to straighten out any of the crooked ones, and removing the 2 loose ones that had been about to fall out anyway, and were most likely bothering Izuku just as much as their anxiety. If I'm old, then what does that make you? Shouta challenges, earning a squawk from the blonde as he steals Izuku for himself and steps out of the car with the feathered feline on his shoulders, burying herself into his capture scarf. Hey! I'm not old. I don't know, I feel pretty ancient and we are the same age. Shouta trails off teasingly, earning another offended squawk for his partner, and a round of chitters from his kid. We'll get you signed in and then when it's actually time for the paper test, and only the paper test, you can change. Alright? Hizashi suggests as they fall into step with the rest of the family. A huff of approval was all that Izuku was willing to give before resummerging himself in Shuta's scarf. How you never get tangled in that thing is a miracle. The blonde huffs in return, earning a high-pitched sweet trill. Most likely, the sheen on their coat allows the alloy to slide right off the little one. Shouta hypothesizes half-heartedly as they emerge from the underground parking facility into the teacher's lounge. You brought your cat son to see the exam this year? Namuri cooed, ditching her paperwork to try and steal the little creature Shouta and Hizashi had taken to carrying everywhere with them. How else would the baby take the exam if we didn't bring them? Hizashi questioned with amused but furrowed brows. All of a sudden, everything in the teacher's lounge comes to a halt. Did you say your pet's taking the exam? Vlad stutters though his laugh. Kid. Both Hizashi and Shouta corrected, like they always do whenever someone decides to call Izuku their pet, just because the baby likes to stay in their sphinx form more than their human one. Do you mean they're your actual kid, if they're taking the exam? 13 inquired curiously. As in a human child? Yes. Shouta answers confused. You don't know Izuku's a kid? Hizashi shrieks, earning a red-eyed glare that's all fond amusement. Holy sheet! Did you two become parents and not tell me? Namuri shrieks, making another attempt to scoop Izuku off of Shouta's shoulders, but fails once again, like always. But we did tell you. Hizashi points out with a stressed-out tone. Are you saying that for the past 2 years you actually thought Izuku was an animal and not our child? Shouta asks a bit incredulously. I for one, just thought you succumbed to your partner's odd habit of calling those pets of YURS fur babies, and the like. Snipe interjected with a lazy drawl of his mechanical voice changer. Another round of silence runs through the room, before a moment of realization falls upon the Aizawa family. We have some phone calls to make. Hizashi decides. No we don't. If they're that stupid then they can continue to be that level of intelligent. Show. Hizashi stresses, turning to look their husband in his eyes. My family. Oh sheet. Never mind. Shouta backtracks fast. We have some calls to make before the exam. Don't bother us. He tacks on as they move to leave the lounge so they could head to Shouta's private office. Send your questions to me in the group chat and I'll answer the non-stupid ones. They corrected their husband but kept his comment about everyone's intelligence, because this was a bit ridiculous. While Hizashi and Shouta made their phone calls, Izuku was left in the waiting room after being checked in by an overtly amused Nizu. The hybrid didn't say anything, but the way that his tail and whiskers kept twitching let Izuku know just what he thought about her family's predicament. So Izuku ended up taking a nap in the sun while waiting for the other participant to arrive, or at least, he had been napping until a shadow casted itself over his body, blocking the sun from her wings. Cracking an eye open showed a purple human crouched down with a hand extended in greeting. The hand made no move to touch her so Izuku didn't mind the human's greeting, except for the fact that the human smells like their doctor. Shinso, most likely was the human's name, so Izuku begrudgingly got up and brushed his jaw against the offered hand, giving the Shinso permission to scratch at her fur. Hello. Aren't you gorgeous? The Shinso cooed, scratching at the base of their ear, earning a happy trill. Are you a campus stray? Or maybe one of the principal's friends with a mutation like this? The shyness trailed off, gently pulling one of his wings open to look at. With his wings already open, she maneuvers them back into the sunlight until the small purple human got the hint and readjusted themselves so that Izuku could be in the sun. Am I in the way? A chirp of confirmation. All right here. The shyness picked Izuku up, earning a HRMF of annoyance, but when they settled Izuku into their lap in the sun, she decided that it was fine and allowed the shyness to keep her in their lap, running their hand through his fur, since she was still in the sun and it felt nice. They ended up staying like that with shyness quietly rambling about their worries for the exam and Izuku occasionally interrupting with a trill, a chirp, a mew, or a purr, until the waiting time was over and numbers are being called to enter the auditorium. Izuku reluctantly asks to be put down with a nudge and a gesture to the floor, which the Shinso complies with, only to give a startled yelp when she shifts into human form. What the F-da? The Shinso exclaims in a surprisingly quiet curse. Humph. Izuku offers in response, unsure what else to say. You're a kid, and you just let me pick you up and pet you? The Shinso hisses under their breath, earning a narrowed-eyed look from the avian feline who was just glad that their spot had been out of the way enough that only the shyness seemed to have a reaction to him. Shinso. Izuku huffs, and taps at their noses. Again, what the F-da? The shyness curses, again. You know my name. Izuku shakes her head in denial. Tapping his nose again, explaining that he knows that they're a Shinso. You know my name is Shyness. The purple kid corrects, earning a nod of agreement. How? That makes Izuku wrinkles their noses, trying to think of the best way to explain it. Then shrugs, gesturing tall, far taller than the shyness in front of him. Shinso, and made the hand sign that her papa had taught her for meet. Oh, is signing better? 'Cause I can. Sign, I mean. I can sign. The Shinosu stumbles over their words, flustered, based on the red tint of their cheeks, but Izuku just shrugs. Uncaring if the small Shinso decides to sign instead of talking so long as they understand what he was trying to say. Right, So you met a taller shyness, and, recognized me? The purple child guesses, earning a nod and a tap on the nose. Oh. You recognize my scent. Taller. Female? A nod. Taller female, oh. My aunt? The Dr. Shinso? The small Shinso guessed. Izuku trilled happily, letting them know that that's the correct answer, just as his number is called. Waving goodbye, Izuku scurries away to take the paper test so that she could change back to normal. Oh, bye? The little Shinso waves, seeming overly confused about something. The teachers get the students seated in the large auditoriums. Izuku is in Group C, the third out of the 5 groupings. Surprisingly, the Shinso is also in Group C, just farther down the line, so they're in a different section of seating than he is. Alrighty students. Congratulations on making it to the UA academic exams. We're about to begin the general course exams. Vlad King calls over the chit-chat of the auditorium. But before we can hand out the tests, we have some rules to go over. During the test, if you are caught looking around the room more than 3 times, a member of our staff will come and escort you out and your test will be marked as 0. There will be no talking during the exam unless you are addressing a UA staff member. The only reason to be addressing a UA staff member is if you need a new pen, or if you are done with the test. Vlad King explains. When you are done with your test, and it has been collected, you will be removed from this auditorium. If you have a practical exam today, then you can take that time to relax or prepare back in the waiting rooms, and if your practical exam isn't today, then you will be free to check out and head home. Now, are you all ready? The Blood Hero exclaims, earning a round of nervous cheers. Slowly, the examiners made their way around the room handing out exam packets, sealed with a piece of red tape so they could tell if it had been tampered with or opened if the tap was ripped. Then the pens were passed out, all the examinees waiting anxiously to begin. Begin. Vlad King called out once everyone had a packet before leaving the stage and taking a seat with some of the other examiners in one of the chairs that lined the walls. The other examiners seemed to aimlessly wander around the room to keep an eye on them all. Izuku took a deep breath before opening the first packet, breaking the seal. They start to look through the packet, scanning everything, not even bothering to pick up their pen yet. All of the tests are relatively simple. Math, science, English, history, and then the paper version of the general hero exam. There aren't any special rules, just read the test packet before you begin, and if you have a question or need new writing utensils, raise your hand. Simple enug, until the general hero exam. UE High School General Course Entrance Examination. Date. Name. Questions 1 to 6 are multiple choice questions, select the answers that apply. 1. If a person were to be suspected of a crime, they are A. Innocent until proven guilty. B. Guilty until proven innocent. C. Police will operate with a neutral opinion. 2. When a person is suspected of a crime, up to how many days can the police hold them before initiating an investigation? A. 3 days. B. 5 days. C. 1 week. 3. Anyone can be arrested and held for up to how many days before being charged? A. 13 days. B. 17 days. C. 23 days. 4. What rights are the suspect informed of? A. Right to remain silent. B. Right to no cruel and/or unusual punishment. C. Right to an attorney. 5. Under what circumstance is unauthorized quirk use legal? A. Life or death circumstance. B. Never. C. Varies per case. 6. What can a company or workplace fire you for? A. Disability. B. Age. C. Incompatible quirk. Questions 7 to 12 are short answer questions. Answers should be 1 to 2 sentences long. 7. What are the legal requirements to qualify an ability as a quirk? 8. What is the percentage of those without quirks? 9. What types of quirks are there? 10. What's the difference between transformation and mutation? 11. What is the suspected civilian pet law, or the SCP law? Questions 12 to 28 are one-word responses. Answers should be 1 word long. 12. Hero or vigilante? 13. Vigilante or anti-hero? 14. Anti-hero or villain? 15. Would you describe yourself as good? 16. Would you describe yourself as neutral? 17. Would you describe yourself as evil? 18. Would others describe you as good? 19. Would others describe you as neutral? 20. Would others describe you as evil? 21. Describe yourself in 1 word. 22. Describe your current surroundings in 1 word. 23. Describe heroes in 1 word. 24. Describe vigilantes in 1 word. 25. Describe anti-hero in 1 word. 26. Describe villains in 1 word. 27. Who do you think of when you think of a hero? 28. What do you think of when you think of the word safe? Questions 29 to 44 are 2-word responses. Answers should be 2 to 4 words long. 29. Name 2 heroes that have died in action. 30. What were the names of the heroes you've chosen for question 29, quirks? 31. What were the civilian names of the heroes you've chosen for question 29? 32. What animals is the principal of UE? 33. What time is it? 34. How many pages are in the test booklet? 35. What are the most important emotions? 36. How many categories of people are there? 37. How many types of pain are there? 38. What do you see as a red flag about people? 39. What do you see as an indicator of someone being safe? 40. What makes a family? 41. What makes a home? 42. Why do you wish to attend UE? 43. What would you consider your goal if you were to get into UE? 44. Would you ever be willing to give up on your goal? Questions 45 to 85 are observation and trivia questions. Answer true or false. 45. There are 27 cameras in this room. 46. There are 9 pro heroes in this room. 47. There are 8 categories of quirks. 48. There are 3 categories of quirks. 49. If you add the two numbers on the opposite sides of dice together, the answer is always 7. 50. The black side of a chess game goes first. 51. An object in motion stays in motion. 52. Failure is the opposite of success. 53. The best course of action is to always speak up. 54. Every being is born of equal rights. 55. People are handed power. 56. There are 11,573 examinees in this room. 57. You can't win a game of chess if you lose your queen. 58. The best course of action is to look the other way. 59. Pandora's box is humanity's greatest test, of which they will always fail. 60. Hate is the strongest emotion. 61. The weak who are handed strength become strong often forget from where they come. 62. The weak can never become the strong. 63. The strong can never become the weak. 64. The best course of action is to fight back. 65. Those who are never given a chance to shine in the light will turn to those who welcome them in the shadows. 66. Curiosity is the strongest emotion. 67. Quirks are what define us. 68. The best course of action is to walk away. 69. Pawns hold the most value the farther into enemy territory it is. 70. There are 5 categories of quirks. 71. People rise to power. 72. Love is the strongest emotion. 73. Those who are born into the shadows can never enter the light. 74. Those born into the light would never fall into the shadows. 75. Actions speak louder than words. 76. People are born into power. 77. It is possible to be both alive and dead at the same time. 78. The least interesting answer is usually the correct one. 79. There are 3 pro heroes in this room. 80. There are 4 pro heroes in this room. Questions 81 to 90 are think questions. Answer to the best of your ability. 81. Where is the line? Where does light meet shadows? 82. What is a civilian? 83. What is a villain? 84. What is a hero? 85. What is a vigilante? 86. What is the difference between spotlight heroes and underground heroes? 87. What is a hero healer? 88. What is an informant? 89. What is a semi-hero? 90. What is an undercover hero? Questions 91 to 94 are checks for understanding. They should be answered with honesty. 91. Would you consider this a stressful event? 92. Was this a calm environment during your testing? 93. How do you feel about this test? 94. How do you feel about your answers? Questions 95 to 99 are personal questions. 95. What are your preferred pronouns? 96. Do you prefer tea or coffee? 97. Would you rather live at home or on campus during the school year? 98. What is your favorite color? 99. How many friends or acquaintances do you have? Final check. 100. Did you answer or at least attempt all the questions on this test? Izuku put the test booklet down. They hadn't seen anything that they hadn't known in the booklet, all the questions seeming almost too easy. Izuku perked up as an idea came to them. They opened the test booklet backward, deciding that they might as well do the whole thing in reverse if it was going to be this easy. Something to make the whole thing more entertaining after the other 4 boring exams. Bonus RUL. A pause to look over the page once again. Turns out there are special rules. Bonus rules, an additional point will be awarded for each of the following. If all questions that are multiples of 7 are not answered. If all answered odd numbers are correct. If all even numbers are not answered. If your name is written in the date section. If the date is written in the name section. If you used a red pen. If all questions ending in 0 are not answered. If you number the bottom center of each page. If you draw a line through all 2s. If you underline entrance examination. If you answered question 97 with 4 fellow examines' names or quirks with their examinee badge number next to it. If all questions that are multiples of 5 are not answered. If all questions with a 1 are not answered. If all questions that are multiples of 9 are not answered. If all questions with a 3 are not answered. If all of the bonus rules are followed, your score will be multiplied by 4. Izuku could barely contain the chuffle that threatened to escape, but they managed to, not wanting to be kicked out when things just got interesting. He mentally went over the rules trying to figure out what needed to be done. Well, first thing, first. Izuku raised a paw into the air, waiting patiently for an examiner to come over. Yes? The examiner questioned. Izuku flashes the hand sign for red to them, handing over the black pen she had been using. Sure. The examiner agrees, handing Izuku their new pen. Izuku's fangs became slightly visible from the almost grin they had as he began the test, beginning with their name and date. Yui High School General Course Entrance Examination. Date, Aizawa Izuku. Name, January 17, 20XX_. Then Izuku moved on to crossing out the 2's and numbering the pages. They froze on the second page debating something before crossing out the 2's that they wrote on the test. Better safe than sorry. Bonus rules, an additional point will be awarded for each of the following. If all questions that are multiples of 7 are not answered. If all answered odd numbers are correct. If all even numbers are not answered. X if your name is written in the date section. X if the date is written in the name section. X if you used a red pen. If all questions ending in 0 are not answered. X if you number the bottom center of each page. X if you draw a line through all 2's. X if you underline entrance examination. If you answered question 97 with 4 fellow examines' names or quirks with their examinee badge number next to it. If all questions that are multiples of 5 are not answered. If all questions with a 1 are not answered. If all questions that are multiples of 9 are not answered. If all questions with a 3 are not answered. If all of the bonus rules are followed, your score will be multiplied by 4. Next were the actual questions. Name 2 heroes that have died in action. There are a lot of heroes who have died in action, or an honorable death, as some say, but who should they put? Oh, Izuku knows exactly who to put. Name 2 heroes that have died in action. The Cloud Hero, Loud Cloud the Smiling Hero, Eri. There are 8 categories of quirks, true. You can't win a game of chess if you lose your queen, false. Pandora's box is humanity's greatest test, of which they will always fail, false. Quirks are what define us, false. Pawns hold the most value the farther into enemy territory it is, true. There are 4 pro heroes in this room, true. What is a hero healer? A hero healer is someone with some type of healing quirk, and just like heroes, they require a healing license. Hero healers can bench heroes for injuries, and technically hold more authority than heroes. What is a semi-hero? Semi-heroes are heroes that work with both Spotlight and Underground heroes. They don't exclusively work with any one category. They also don't advertise themselves, but if they are seen or recorded, they don't bother taking down the footage or covering up their existence. Izuku paused on the 97th question, trying to figure out how to get that information without looking around. Technically, Izuku could get away with 1 or 2 quick glances around the room and not be kicked out, but there is also the possibility of being caught docking points from the exam. But, with Izuku's memory, they only need 1 glance. Wait, aren't the people from the waiting room in here? Izuku lets out an almost silent chatter as they begin to write them down, doing as the bonus rule says and ignoring the original question. Would you rather live at home or on campus during the school year? Matsuyama Keo number 1324, Erita Keiichi number 1176, Azui Tsuyu number 11259, Yamamura Tadao number 2376. Checking over their work, Izuku purred in approval, raising a hand. An examiner came over and Izuku handed her test to them. The examiner escorted them out of the auditorium. Not many others were in the waiting room, so Izuku jogged over to the area of tiles covered in sunlight from before. Shifting back into his natural form, he laid down, content to take a nap until the hero exam practical test began. Growling, Izuku twisted through the air, dodging the debris caused by both robots and examinees. The city streets were a mess, and were becoming more and more unsafe as each minute dragged by. If they were marked down for destruction of public property or civilian endangerment, she was confident that the majority of the students currently taking this test wouldn't earn a single point. Sadly, this test is run by the Hero Public Safety Committee, so things like that don't actually matter. So long as the students passing have a flashy quirk and were able to give the proper show of strength, they could pass. Which means that anyone with a mental quirk is almost automatically out of the running for the hero course. Anyone with an emitter quirk that only works on living things is also out of the running unless they get really creative with their environment. Diving quickly, Izuku grabs an examinee, pulling them out of the way, much to the students' shock if their scream was anything to go by. He drops them off in a safe area before taking off to the skies. Taking a surveillance loop over the city, Izuku made a last-minute, potentially recluse decision. She could care less about this quirkist exam, being more concerned with the number of students that were receiving injuries of varying degrees. Having already gathered 42 or 43 points from taking down robots, Izuku turned his attention to protecting instead of destroying. If his 40-odd points were enough to get them into UA, then great. If not, then oh well. They were applying to other hero schools for a reason after all. Izuku dived down, knocking a 1-pointer away from an examinee. They seemed to be a bit dazed but otherwise fine, so Izuku took back to the sky, gliding around the arena, looking for anyone that was clearly injured or in danger. They continued intervening. In some cases they flew the injured examinee back to the starting gate. But of course, the moment everything started to calm down, and Izuku was able to take a breath, a giant robot, the 0-pointer appeared. Izuku let the examinee that they had been escorting to safety off their back, receiving a pat on the head as thanks before taking off with a flap of their wings. They shot up into the air and over to the 0-pointer. Instead of landing, they began circling the base of the 0-pointer, grabbing anyone that would have been crushed by the robot. It may have been the last 3 minutes of the exam, but it was the most chaotic, the most stressful, and the most exhausting 3 minutes Izuku has ever had to live through. By the time President Mike calls time's up, Izuku is laying on the ground panting. A few of the examinees that they had helped looked at them with concern. A few tried to approach only to be shooed away by someone half their height. "Oh goodness, are you alright, dear? Any injuries?" Recovery Girl questioned, causing Izuku to let out a pitiful keen that Recovery Girl recognized far too easily. "Just exhausted then?" Recovery Girl questioned, checking over Izuku's fur and wings. Izuku lifts their head up off the ground to look at Recovery Girl. The Sphinx lets out a huff of air before moving to stand back up, only to let out a sharp yelp, before regaining balance on 3 paws instead of 4. Now, none of that, dear. Give it here." Recovery Girl states, not allowing for any argument. Izuku lets out a low whine, showing their paw to Recovery Girl. Her usual tisk of distaste was heard. "Oh dear, let's get you to the med bay so those shards can be removed." Recovery Girl instructs as her med bots appear. Izuku chattered at Recovery Girl before jumping onto the med bot transporter. "None of that. You're hurt, and seeing as it was due to a UA-sponsored event, UA, or more specifically, I, am required to treat it, and you know this." Recovery Girl chuckles, making their way back to the exit, leaving a group of confused examinees behind, all of their injuries having already been dealt with. "Honestly, Izuku, as head of UA medical staff, I should scold you for all the reckless, and frankly, dangerous stunts you pulled during this exam." Recovery Girl states as she pulls shards of scrap metal out of Izuku's paw. "And if anyone asks, I did just that." Recovery Girl says with a huff of amusement. Izuku nodded their head, clicking in glee at both not receiving a Recovery Girl scolding. She is fully aware of the favoritism Recovery Girl was once again showing towards Izuku and is completely fine with receiving said favoritism. A few moments later there was a knock on the door. It opened to show both of her parents in the doorway glancing at Izuku with concern written on their features and intertwined with their scenes. "Come in and close the door behind yourself," Recovery Girl said, not even looking up from where she was still pulling out shards. "What happened?" His bright human questioned, clearly wanting to move closer and fuss over Izuku but not wanting to get in Recovery Girl's way. "Oh? I was under the impression that both of you were watching the events unfold?" Recovery Girl says with a quirked brow, just slightly looking at them before getting back to work. "We were," Shouta says with a sigh. "What Zashi means is, what is Izuku's current medical condition?" Recovery Girl hummed in acknowledgement, taking out a larger shard, causing Izuku to hiss before settling down as the tension finally started to leave their body. "Just some small puncture wounds from scrap metal shards. The worst of it was in Izuku's front left paw, and while the other paws did also have shards, only the front left one will need to stay wrapped for the rest of the day." Recovery Girl explains as she wraps said paw. Izuku trilled, waving the paw not currently being wrapped dismissively, stretching his jaw in a wide yawn. Izuku rubs at their eye with the back of their bandaged paw once Recovery Girl lets it go. "Aizu, baby, you look exhausted. And seeing as you literally carried other examinees to safety, I think you need to rest." Hizashi states, walking over to Izuku to slide the top of their head now that they know they won't be in Recovery Girl's way. Izuku leans into the touch with a purr. "Ready to go home, little one?" Shouta questioned, walking up to Izuku's side. Izuku gave a small nod, shifting into their smaller form now that there wasn't any metal to cut her paws open on. Shouta picked Izuku up, letting the little Sphinx nuzzle into his capture weapon, Hizashi offering a few more pets before placing a kiss to Izuku's forehead. "Alright then, let's head home," Hizashi states with a soft smile, bidding farewell to Recovery Girl as the Aizawa clan took their leave. "You did good, little one," Shouta states as Izuku drifts off to sleep, content with taking a nap on the drive home.
Okay, sadly the chapter is over. And if you enjoyed the video, just leave a like and subscribe with post notification, so when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.